It's an uncomfortable truth, but a necessary one. Men are rarely affirmed for who they are beyond their usefulness. From an early age, boys are conditioned to be performers, to achieve, to produce, to suppress emotion in favor of utility. Strength is rewarded, stoicism admired, vulnerability often punished, or worse, ignored. And this conditioning doesn't vanish in adulthood, it mutates. Most men, even those who seem confident or successful, are navigating a world where their value is measured almost exclusively by what they do, not who they are, not how they feel, not what they've endured, just results, just output, just usefulness. So imagine, in the midst of that, a moment of intimacy, vulnerable, exposed, raw, and instead of judgment or expectation, he hears words like, "I see your strength," or "I'm proud of you," or even more powerfully, "You matter to me." Those aren't just romantic lines. They're emotional recalibrations. They're permissions. And in many cases, they're healing. You see, when a man is told something like that before a kiss, before the initiation of emotional or physical intimacy, it's not just about the kiss itself. It's about permission to feel safe in a world that constantly demands he armor up. Now, let's be precise. This isn't about pandering to insecurity or inflating egos. That's superficial. That's short term. What I'm talking about is genuine recognition, a kind of emotional acknowledgement that most men never hear but deeply need. And what's remarkable is how simple the moment can be. A handful of words spoken with sincerity can dismantle years of quiet pressure. Psychologically, this is important because when a man feels genuinely affirmed, when he feels seen and valued, he doesn't retreat deeper into himself. He opens, he relaxes, he lets his guard down. He becomes, in a very literal way, available. And that in turn deepens the connection emotionally, physically, spiritually. There's an entire dimension of human intimacy that remains locked unless both people feel recognized. For men, recognition rarely comes through language. Society doesn't reward emotional openness in men, it rewards performance. But when a woman sees beyond that, when she affirms his essence, his effort, his presence, that's when trust is built. And not just any trust, the kind of trust that makes space for love. We often underestimate the impact of quiet affirmations. We think grand gestures are what matter. But the truth is, for many men, the most powerful moments happen in stillness. When he's allowed to be himself, unguarded, without the mask, and a few words. "I see you. I'm proud of you. You're enough." Those words are like medicine. Not because he needs validation, but because he rarely receives it without condition. From a philosophical standpoint, this aligns with what Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, that man is not destroyed by suffering, but by suffering without meaning. And meaning is often found through connection, through feeling that our struggle is seen by another, not necessarily solved, but witnessed. This is especially true for men who've carried invisible burdens, fathers working quietly to provide, sons hiding pain to avoid shame, partners trying to hold it all together while silently unraveling. When a woman says something like, "You don't have to prove anything to me," in a moment of intimacy, that's not just sweet, that's revolutionary, because it grants him something he rarely experiences: freedom from performance. And that's when the kiss becomes more than just a kiss. It becomes a signal that he's not just a body, not just a role. He's a human being worthy of care, worthy of desire, worthy of being chosen, not for what he provides, but for who he is. So the next time you wonder what 5 words every man wants to hear before a kiss, remember this. It's not about scripting the perfect phrase. It's about understanding the emotional architecture behind the moment. The man you're with may have never heard that he's enough. He may have gone his entire life being useful but not valued. He may not even know how much he needs to hear it until you say it. And when you do, with presence, with honesty, with warmth, don't be surprised when something in him softens, when the armor lowers, and the connection becomes not just physical, but profound. Because at the core of every man is not just the desire to be wanted, but the hope to be seen. Let's talk about respect. Not as a social formality or a checkbox of polite behavior, but as a deeper, more existential concept. Because when we speak of what every man wants to hear before a kiss, we're not just talking about seduction or romance. We're talking about recognition. We're talking about identity. We're talking about a man's place in the emotional landscape of intimacy. Respect to a man isn't just appreciation for what he does, it's an acknowledgement of who he is, his decisions, his convictions, his discipline, his silence even. And if you observe carefully, you'll notice that a man who feels genuinely respected will offer a version of himself that no one else gets, not because he's withholding, but because trust and respect are the gateway to his emotional and psychological vulnerability. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Respect is not the same thing as agreement. You can disagree with someone, challenge them even, and still respect them. In fact, the highest form of respect is precisely that, offering honest opposition without condescension. And men, particularly those who've worked to build their character, can sense the difference between someone who's challenging them to grow and someone who's subtly trying to diminish them. Before a kiss, before any form of true emotional closeness, what most men want isn't worship. They're not looking to be idolized. What they want is to be seen as a capable, sovereign individual, someone worthy of being met as an equal. I trust your lead, for example, is not an act of submission. It's an act of alignment. It's saying, I recognize that you've thought about this, that you're not reckless, that your strength is not brute force, but conscious direction. At the heart of this skill set is the belief in self-discipline, that you are the leader, you are the note taker, that the status quo is not good enough. That kind of language, that energy communicates something deeper than surface attraction. It says, I respect the way you move through the world. And that's rare because, again, in the modern world, men are often reduced to binary roles: protector, provider, competitor. And when you reduce someone to a role, you erase their individuality. But when you offer respect, real respect, you're not just accepting the role they play, you're accepting the soul that's behind it. There's a profound psychological need here, and it's not just male specific. Every human being wants to be valued for something intrinsic, but for men, that value is almost always tied to utility. Society says you matter if you produce, if you achieve, if you lead well. So when a woman steps into his world and says through her words or even her demeanor, I see the intention behind your leadership, I trust it, I respect it, that moment lands hard. It's not flattery, it's not submission, it's validation of his internal compass. A philosopher, Immanuel Kant, believed that to treat someone with dignity is to treat them as an end in themselves, not merely as a means to your own ends. And that's what respect really is. It's not transactional. It's not manipulation masked as praise. It's the decision to honor someone's autonomy, even in closeness. In romantic relationships, many women underestimate how powerful this is. They aim to be desired, and that matters. But what men often crave on a deeper level is to be respected by someone who understands the weight they carry, the decisions they wrestle with, the self-restraint they maintain, the discipline they wake up with every day, even when no one's watching. And this is why so many men respond, often emotionally, when they finally hear words that suggest their leadership, their discipline, their presence is trusted. It hits something ancient, something primal. Not because they need their ego stroked, but because they're tired of being questioned, doubted, or reduced to stereotypes. So when a woman in a moment of intimacy signals with her words or eyes, I see your strength, I don't need to control it, I trust it, that man hears something far more profound than admiration. He hears, you are safe to be yourself here. And once he feels that, he doesn't need to pretend, he doesn't need to posture, he doesn't need to dominate the room or protect himself from emotional vulnerability, because respect is the key that unlocks his authenticity. And when a man can be fully himself, not just desired for his body, but valued for his being, that's when love stops being a transaction and becomes transformation. So if you want to speak to a man's heart, don't just praise him, respect him, not for what he gives you, but for who he is when no one's looking. That's what every man longs to hear before a kiss, whether he admits it or not. One of the most overlooked truths in modern relationships, and particularly in how men relate to intimacy, is the importance of emotional safety. Not physical safety, not financial security, emotional safety. That sense that in this moment with this person, I don't have to guard my internal world. I don't have to perform. I don't have to be strategic or cautious or impressive. I can just be. We live in a culture that talks a lot about women needing emotional security, and rightly so. But the conversation often leaves out the fact that men need it just as much, perhaps even more, given how little they're encouraged to explore or express their inner lives. And when a man does feel emotionally safe with someone, the transformation in him is striking. He becomes more open, more connected, and paradoxically more powerful because he's no longer spending energy suppressing or masking his vulnerability. The tragedy is that many men have been conditioned to expect emotional risk every time they get close to someone. Vulnerability often comes with a cost: mockery, rejection, being seen as weak, or being subtly punished for not living up to an image of constant strength. So instead of opening up, most men learn to build emotional bunkers. And what do bunkers do? They protect, but they also isolate. Now imagine, within that guarded interior, a moment happens. He hears 5 words, or maybe even just a tone of voice that tells him, you're safe here. Not because the world has suddenly become softer, but because the person in front of him has no interest in exploiting his weakness. That moment is more than romantic, it's revolutionary. Saying something like, you're safe with me, and meaning it, sends a signal that speaks directly to the part of him that's never fully exhaled. It's not about saying, I'll never hurt you, because no one can promise that. It's about saying, I honor what you share. I won't use it against you. I see it as strength, not failure. That's an incredibly rare thing for a man to experience. In fact, for many men, it's almost unthinkable. From a psychological perspective, emotional safety is what allows the nervous system to shift out of survival mode. It's what allows a person to stop bracing for attack and start actually connecting. You cannot love what you do not feel safe around. And a man who's often learned to navigate the world through control of outcomes, emotions, appearances, will only relinquish that control when he no longer feels he's being hunted or judged. And it doesn't require grand gestures. It requires subtle consistency. It's in the way you listen without interrupting. It's in not laughing at his pain, even when it comes out awkwardly. It's in honoring what he doesn't say just as much as what he does. Because men often express their deepest truths sideways, through actions, through silence, through hesitation. And it takes a kind of emotional intelligence to hear that without demanding he speak it in your language. And when he does begin to open, you'll see something remarkable. His guard lowers, but his presence strengthens. He's not less of a man because he trusts you. He's more of a man because he no longer has to fracture himself between what he feels and what he presents. You've created a space where his humanity is not just tolerated, but welcomed. This is not just relationship advice. This is a human truth. Every one of us longs to be fully known and fully loved, but you cannot be fully known unless you feel safe. And men, despite the bravado and the armor, carry that same longing. It's just buried under years of conditioning, expectation, and fear of exposure. So when you, in a moment of intimacy, maybe right before a kiss or during a quiet evening conversation, look at him and offer something as simple as, I get you, or you're allowed to feel here, you may not realize how rare that is, how profound, how healing. You're not just being kind, you're being transformative. You're showing him that connection doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. And that, more than anything, is what builds lasting intimacy. Not attraction alone, but safety. Because when a man feels safe, he doesn't just give you a part of him, he gives you the real him. So if you truly want to unlock a man's heart, don't ask him to feel. Make it safe enough that he chooses to. Desire is one of those concepts that we tend to misunderstand, especially in relationships. We talk about it in surface level terms, appearance, chemistry, timing, but we rarely explore what's beneath it. And this is particularly true when we talk about men and desire. The common narrative tells us men are driven primarily by the physical, visual, stimulation, sexual instinct, biological impulse. And while there's a measure of truth in that, it's not the whole story. In fact, it barely scratches the surface. What men crave at the deepest level is to be desired, not just for their body, but for their being. And there's a significant distinction there. Being wanted physically is gratifying, yes, but it's transient. It can fade with time, change with mood, or disappear when the context shifts. But being wanted existentially, being chosen because of who they are, their mind, their principles, the way they navigate difficulty, that has staying power, that has meaning. Desire, when it's rooted in something deeper than impulse, becomes affirming. And for a man who's used to being seen as a provider, a protector, or simply as a body, the moment he realizes that someone desires him, not for what he does, but for what he is, that moment is emotionally disarming. Now think about the context of a kiss, not as a transaction or a milestone, but as an intimate symbol, a moment where two people say, without words, I'm with you, I see you, I want you. When a man hears something like, I love the way your mind works, or I've never felt this drawn to someone's energy, it's not just romantic, it's validating at the level of identity. It's saying, you're not an object, you're a presence I want to be near. And here's the philosophical dimension that gets ignored. Desire is tied to meaning. In Viktor Frankl's terms, when people feel they are meaningful to another, they are far more likely to connect deeply. Desire isn't about hunger alone. It's about relevance. And men want to feel relevant beyond the physical. They want to feel that their presence moves something in the other person's world, that their mind, their values, their character evokes attraction, not just their jawline or confidence. We've grown up in a culture saturated with images, quick dopamine hits, and shallow validation. Swipe left, swipe right, hot or not. It's no wonder people feel disposable. But desire becomes sacred when it's intentional, when it's aimed at the core of who someone is. And for many men, this kind of intentional desire is incredibly rare. They're used to being wanted in pieces, rarely in whole. So when a woman says something like, I admire your patience, or you move with purpose and that's magnetic, she's communicating something most men almost never hear. I desire your essence, not just your effect. And this creates a deeper connection because now he's not striving to keep your attention through performance. He knows that his authenticity already holds it. And here's where this integrates with emotional safety and respect. When desire is rooted in emotional safety, it creates trust. When it's built on respect, it creates depth. And when it's expressed clearly through words, through energy, through presence, it becomes irresistible. Not because it flatters the ego, but because it nourishes the soul. You see, what men want to hear before a kiss isn't necessarily poetic. It doesn't need to be elaborate. What they want is to know that what you feel is real and that it's directed at who they are, not just what they look like. And when that's clear, the kiss itself becomes a culmination of something much larger. A moment that's not just about pleasure, but about meaning. And meaning is what every human craves, beneath every desire, every pursuit, every intimate act. So if you want to speak to the heart of a man, not just arouse him, but reach him, let your desire be known. Not just through body language or expectation, but through truth, through words that say, I want the man you are, not just the body you bring. That kind of desire doesn't fade. It builds, it deepens, it transforms. do, because in the end, what every man wants to hear before a kiss isn't just that he's attractive. It's that he's desired fully, consciously, and for all that he is. There's something remarkably disarming in hearing the words, "You don't have to prove yourself to me." For many men, that sentence is almost alien, foreign, not because it's complicated, but because it cuts against the grain of what they've been taught since boyhood. From an early age, most men internalize the idea that love is earned, that worth is conditional, that their value is tied not to who they are, but to what they can achieve, build, protect, or endure. Whether it's in sports, school, business, or relationships, the unspoken rule is the same. Show me why you matter, or get out of the way. Now, that's not entirely unjust. Responsibility, discipline, and competence are crucial virtues. A man who refuses to cultivate them doesn't grow. But there's a dangerous flip side to this mentality. It creates a deep psychological fatigue, a sense that even in love, even in intimacy, he must still be on, still competing, still proving. So when a woman looks him in the eye in a moment of quiet presence and says, "You don't have to prove yourself to me," she's not just offering kindness. She's offering something much deeper, relief. And relief, when it comes from someone he respects, can open parts of a man he didn't even know were locked. This doesn't mean men want to be coddled or excused from accountability. That's not the point. A real man doesn't run from challenge. But what he is desperate for, and often too guarded to say, is the experience of being accepted without pretense. To know that he is not constantly under evaluation, that his value, at least here, at least with this person, is not conditional on performance. In psychological terms, this is the distinction between conditional regard and unconditional presence. Carl Rogers, the humanistic psychologist, spoke often of unconditional positive regard as the soil in which people can grow. It's not a blind acceptance of all behavior. Rather, it's the posture of saying, "I see you. You are allowed to be real here. I am not measuring you every moment you speak." And for men who often hide their struggles behind silence, this kind of space is revolutionary, because they live in a world where worth is measured in output, where love is often performance-based, and where vulnerability, unless it's perfectly packaged, is seen as weakness. So when a woman removes the scoreboard and says, "I'm not keeping track, you don't have to win with me," she's not lowering the bar, she's raising the intimacy. This isn't about settling. It's about allowing someone to exist fully without the burden of constant justification. And paradoxically, it's in that space that a man will often rise to his higher self. Not because he has to, but because he wants to. Because love, when it's not a courtroom, becomes a sanctuary. And in a sanctuary, people heal, people risk, people give more. The truth is, most men walk around with a silent pressure, a pressure to be enough, to earn their place, to never slip. And that pressure can be crushing, especially in a relationship. If every conversation feels like a job interview, if every moment feels like a test, then love becomes labor, not rest. And men, especially good men, begin to wonder if there's anywhere in the world they can just be. And that's where those 5 words come in. You don't have to prove yourself to me. It's a release valve, a way of saying, you're already enough for me to be here. And when those words are said with sincerity, backed not by sentiment, but by consistency, they don't make him complacent. They make him courageous. Because now, for perhaps the first time, he can be fully present. He can share his doubts without shame. He can admit when he doesn't know. He can show you his internal landscape, not just the polished version he's trained the world to see. And in doing so, he becomes not less of a man, but more of one. Integrated, whole, alive. So the next time you wonder what to say before a kiss, what might pierce through the noise of insecurity, ego, and performance, try those words, not as strategy, but as truth. Because when a man hears, you don't have to prove yourself to me, he hears something else too. You're finally free. It's easy to forget that men too want to feel needed. Not just useful, needed in a way that's emotional, human, and sincere. Not as a protector on call, not as a walking solution to everyone else's problems, but as someone whose presence brings calm, whose steadiness creates peace. So when a woman turns to a man and says, "You make me feel safe too," it carries more weight than she may ever realize. As last two words, two, that's what changes everything. Because what they imply is mutuality, reciprocity, a shared experience of safety, of grounding, of being seen and supported. And for a man, that kind of reflection is rare. Culturally, he's been told his job is to protect, to hold strong when others collapse. And in many ways, that's a noble ideal. Men are wired to endure, to serve a purpose larger than themselves. That's a core part of their dignity. But in the process, they're often stripped of the very thing they most quietly crave, to know that their presence is healing to someone else, that they're not just tolerated or admired from a distance, but trusted, emotionally trusted. To be that person for someone else is a kind of existential affirmation that no praise or performance can replace. You see, men spend a lot of time wondering if they're enough, not just physically or financially, but energetically. Am I a calming presence, or do I make things worse? Do I bring peace into this space, or just noise? So when a woman expresses clearly and simply, "You make me feel safe too," she's not just complimenting him, she's completing a loop. She's letting him know that all the discipline, all the restraint, all the effort he's made to be trustworthy and stable, it worked. And this matters because too often men are reduced to function. They're expected to bear weight, but never told that their weight bearing brings peace. They're called upon in crisis, but rarely thanked when their presence keeps the storm away entirely. There's an invisible labor men do, holding space, staying composed, absorbing stress, and it's not always seen. So when someone finally says, "Your steadiness makes me feel safe," it lands like a balm. What's interesting psychologically is how safety builds intimacy, and not just for the one receiving it. The giver of safety begins to feel a deeper sense of purpose, even affection, when they know that their care lands, when it's not just assumed or expected, but recognized. That recognition, "You make me feel safe too," it bridges a gap. It makes him feel chosen, not just for what he can do, but for what he is when he shows up. And there's a philosophical layer to this as well. At the core of human relationships is the idea that love is not one-directional. It cannot survive on imbalance. A relationship where one person is always the giver and the other always the receiver becomes transactional. Love, real love, must contain mutual reverence. So when a man who's used to giving safety is told, "You give that to me," it reinforces that the connection is not just emotional consumption, it's creation, something shared. And again, this doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be said in a moment of stillness, a quiet car ride right before a kiss. "You make me feel safe too." That moment tells him you're not just admired, you're trusted. Not just strong, you're safe. And not just protective. This gives him permission to rest in his role, to stop striving for approval. Because approval says you've passed, but reverence says you're enough. And that shift from performance to presence, that's where intimacy truly deepens. That's when he begins to open, not because he's required to, but because he wants to share himself with someone who sees the value of what he brings to the table. So the next time you stand close to someone who carries that quiet strength, who listens before he reacts, who holds space for you without demanding anything in return, say it. Say what most men never hear but always hope to. "You make me feel safe too." Watch how his posture shifts, how his eyes soften, how his entire sense of worth realigns in that moment of acknowledgement. Because when a man hears those words, what he receives is not just gratitude, it's confirmation that his strength builds peace and his presence is home.